Good evening. Chapter 6, Great Expectations. Word for word retyping. Let's not waste any time. My state of mind regarding the pilfering from which I had been so unexpectedly exonerated did not impel me to frank disclosure. But I hope it had some dregs of good at the bottom of it. So just to remind everyone, the way that chapter 5 ended was with the convict who is effectively Pip's friend and who Pip helped by stealing food for, is recaptured and goes back to the prison ships. But before that, tells the soldiers that he stole the food from the blacksmith, effectively exonerating Pip, even though Pip was not under any suspicion. I do not recall that I felt any tenderness of conscience in reference to Mrs. Joe. When the fear of being found out was lifted off me. But I loved Joe. Perhaps for no better reason in those early days than because the dear fellow let me love him. And as to him, my inner self was not so easily composed. It was much upon my mind, particularly when I first saw him looking about for his file, that I ought to tell Joe the whole truth. Yet I did not. And for the reason that I mistrusted that if I did, he would think me worse than I was. The fear of losing Joe's confidence and of thenceforth sitting in the chimney corner at night, staring drearily at my forever lost companion and friend tied up my tongue. I morbidly represented to myself that if Joe knew it, I never afterwards could see him at the fireside, feeling his fair whisker without thinking that he was meditating on it. So far in the 5 chapters that we have retyped, it's been a lot of the Roland Barthes proeretic code, the code of action. Here we have really a lot of reflection taking place, and the novel is one of the best formats for going deep psychologically. And so after 5 chapters of action, it's interesting to see Dickens slow down. You always want to manage the rhythm and release of information, and just slow down, go inward, give us more of the inside of Pip. So it's curious to note. that if Joe knew it, I never afterwards could see him glance, however casually, at yesterday's meat or pudding when it came on today's table, without thinking that he was debating whether I had been in the pantry. That if Joe knew it, and at any subsequent period of our joint domestic life, remarked that his beer was flat or thick, the conviction that he suspected tar in it would bring a rush of blood to my face. In a word, I was too cowardly to avoid doing what I knew to be what I knew to be right, as I had been too cowardly to avoid doing what I knew to be wrong. And here we know Pip is being too hard on himself, because helping that convict was not necessarily a wrong. Firstly, he was threatened, and secondly, the convict has proven himself to be an honorable person. So I think, Great Expectations is one of the great coming-of-age books, and I wonder if this very short 3-page chapter is important for setting up who Pip is at the beginning of his coming-of-age story. A young child, easily influenced, strong sense of guilty conscience, a lot of doubt, calling himself too cowardly, and it's setting up who he will become as he goes through the coming-of-age process. I had no intercourse with the world at that time. I didn't know the world. And I imitated none of its many inhabitants who act in this manner. Quite an untaught genius, I made the discovery of the line of action for myself. And again, he's being hard on himself, saying, I didn't learn how to be cowardly from anyone. I'm a genius of cowardice. And we know this is not true. We know Pip is quite clever and brave. So, I think as readers, it's the opposite of bragging. It's understatement, and it makes us like him more. As I was sleepy, before we were far away from the prison ship, Joe took me on his back again and carried me home. He must have had a tiresome journey of it, for Mr. Wopsle, being knocked up, was in such a very bad temper that if the church had been thrown open, he would probably have excommunicated the whole expedition, beginning with Joe and myself. In his lay capacity, he persisted in sitting down in the damp to such an insane extent that when his coat was taken off to be dried at the kitchen fire, the circumstantial evidence on his trousers would have hanged him. I didn't fully understand this joke if it had been a capital offense. Like, is the joke that if it's a capital offense to get your trousers wet, then he'd be hanged? Because I don't get the joke, but, you know, it's got something to do with Mr. Wopsle being tired. By that time, I was staggering on the kitchen floor, like a little drunkard, though having been newly set upon my feet, and through having been fast asleep, and through waking in the heat and lights and noise of tongues. As I came to myself, with the aid of a heavy thump between the shoulders and the restorative exclamation, "Yah, was there ever such a boy as this?" So true, Mrs. Joe, from my sister. I found Joe telling them about the convict's confession, and all the visitors suggesting different ways by which he had got into the pantry. Mr. Pumblechook made out, after carefully surveying the premises, that he had first got upon the roof of the forge, and had then got upon the roof of the house, all of which we know is not true because Pip stole the food, and had then let himself down the kitchen chimney by a rope made of his bedding. He has no bedding, the convict, cut into strips. And as Mr. Pumblechook was very positive and drove his own chase cart over everybody, it was agreed that it must be so. Mr. Wopsle indeed wildly cried out, "No!" with the feeble malice, oh, I love that, with the feeble malice of a tired man. But as he had no theory and no coat on, he was unanimously set at naught, not to mention his smoking hard behind as he stood with his back to the kitchen fire to draw the damp out, which was not calculated to inspire confidence. It wouldn't be Dickens without a tiny bit of social commentary about how, the opinion is carried by the person with the most bravado. This was all I heard that night, for my sister clutched me as a slumberous offense to the company, to the company's eyesight, and assisted me up to bed with such a strong hand that I seemed to have 50 boots on, and to be dangling them all against the edges of the stairs. So you can really feel how heavy he is. I think this is so hard to do, and Dickens uses figurative language to create this sense of a heavy body going up the stairs very artfully. My state of mind, as I have described it, began before I was up in the morning. This is his guilty conscience. And lasted long after the subject had died out and had ceased to be mentioned, saving on exceptional occasions. This is actually a very slick piece of time, of speeding up time, where we know now that this incident that happened on Christmas Day, the last line is telling us that this incident with the convict happened, and then it died out as a subject and ceased to be mentioned except occasionally. So that's a way of telling us of moving time forward, many months or even years possibly. So it's actually very skillful to say this was one contained episode, the episode with the convict on the marshes, and it was interesting and notable, and it's how the book starts. But then Dickens is actually moving time forward. So today we've only done 16 minutes, but it's a short chapter. I want to look ahead and see. Chapter 7 is long, and perhaps it's worth me doing a part of chapter 7. But I think, let's just be happy with what we have. I'm delighted that it was a nice short chapter, and I can rest up for tomorrow. And it's very interesting. I think I think a lot about rhythm and release of information. And we've had 5 action-packed chapters, and now we have this sort of internal one. So it's something to think about, and really enjoyed. I'm really enjoying this so far. It's I started at 9:30 at night after my daughter has gone to sleep, and I always feel tired maybe 5 minutes before I start, and then once I start, I just get a lot of energy, really enjoy it, and find myself deeply immersed in the world that Dickens has created, and enjoying his language. And one of the reasons that I want to do this, beyond the fact that it'll help my own writing, beyond that, the fact that it just puts my butt in the seat and gets me at the computer when it's hard, when things are in transition. It's hard for me to do my own work at night, given that we have a baby. But I think the other reason is I just want to put out media into the world that is the opposite of the amygdala stimulating media. I want this to be soothing, calming, relaxing. I want to put media out into the world that is an antidote or antithetical to the media that I find so draining, disturbing. So that's why I've embarked on this project, and I'm really enjoying it. So thank you for being part of it. Hope to see you at future ones. And even if you're reading this or paying attention to this, many years from now, or going to sleep to it, or listening to it at 2x speed, or however it is you consume the information, thank you for doing it. Okay, with that, let's stop here, and next week we'll continue with chapter 7, and thanks everyone.